Welcome back to Light the Fuse, your one-stop shop for all things Mission Impossible. And Charles, how are we feeling today?
I feel great. I think this was a really great interview that we had with David Vickery, the visual effects supervisor of Rogue Nation. How many visual effects supervisors have we had now? We had Roger Guyette, who did 3.
Yeah.
We did John Knoll, who did 1 and Ghost Protocol, right?
Yeah.
And I guess that's all of them. That's a lot of movies, though.
But a lot of visual effects artists.
Yes, yeah. So this is a fun chat that we get to have, and we've never spoken with anybody really about the visual effects of Rogue Nation. So this is a really great conversation that we have, and he's really funny and charming, and yeah, I think you're gonna love it, and you're gonna love we post a picture from our Zoom chat in our show notes because he has a majestic mustache, which you will hear us talk about.
Can we put this on Twitter as well and Instagram? As much as people love the show notes, I think we need to get this mustache
sure, yeah.
as far as possible.
Let's put it on social media too. Why not? People need to see this mustache.
Yeah, it's glorious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really fun chat, and I think everybody will really love hearing him talk. And we should say that he is the visual effects supervisor on Jurassic World Dominion, which is coming out next month, and I'm sure does not need our plug, but, just to let people know, he did all the dinosaurs there, so check that out. He's at ILM now, so we talk about that a little bit, but yeah, he is a great guy.
Yes.
This week's episode is brought to you by John B., who's been around for a long time. We really appreciate him, as well as Elvis Ripley, who's talked to us about how huge an effect Rogue Nation has had on his career as a cinematographer and a filmmaker. And then I also want to thank Jeremy Dillon, and instead of plugging his podcast this week, we're going to go ahead and give a shout out to Imogen Clark, an indie artist that he manages, and to check out her new single Enemy, which is on Spotify and SoundCloud, and he wants everybody to know that Imogen's favorite Mission Impossible film is Rogue Nation, so this could not be any more perfect. So go check that out. And yeah, should we get into it?
Yeah, let's get into it. Go ahead and let's hear this interview.
We are so happy to be joined by one of the VFX artists from Rogue Nation, David Vickery. How are you doing? You have an amazing Henry Cavill-esque mustache right now. We have to say that. Coming to us from London, or in England, somewhere. Are you in London?
I'm in London, yeah. It's a shame you're not going to get pictures with this podcast because this moustache is getting a lot of attention.
Hey, if we're happy to take pictures. We can put it in our show notes and let everyone see this amazing mustache.
I've hidden it for 2 years under a mask. And then it comes out and people are like, who the hell is that? I don't get recognized anymore.
No, it's amazing. We're so excited to have you on because, we were just pre-gaming and we haven't had anybody on from Rogue Nation who worked on the visual effects. And the visual effects are pretty interesting because I think they prevised by ILM, or how far along did ILM get? And then DNEG, was DNEG on the whole time? Tell us the story.
Yeah, that's it. That's how I got involved, really.
Okay.
So Grady Kofer, who was the original visual effects supervisor who worked with ILM, and ILM have a huge history of working on the franchise. John Knoll and Roger Guyette, you've spoken to both of them. And so Double Negative had obviously come to the table with an offer. We had capacity at the time to do the work, and we were keen to try and get involved in such an amazing franchise. And I was introduced to the team, and I think Double Negative put together a really compelling package of people and talent to do the work. So the work shifted from ILM at that point to Double Negative, which is where Grady and I met, and Grady handed the work over to me. Okay. And that was May 2014, probably. So Grady had done a lot of the prep already on the show.
Right. So what were your biggest kind of objectives on this one? Obviously, a lot of wire work removal from the plane, right?
Yeah, but the thing about Mission Impossible is that, and especially as a visual effects supervisor, you come onto the project and they say to you, your goal, your mission, to coin a phrase, should you choose to accept it, is not to do visual effects. So you're like, hang on, how does that work? But that's that's a big part of my job, is trying to work with the filmmakers to try and see how you can achieve things in camera. And that's through the use of traditional filmmaking techniques, old school smoke and mirrors. But how do you go about filming things? How do you help them achieve their vision without defaulting to perhaps the easy option, which is, we'll do it in CG. That's a bit of a cop-out when it comes to Mission Impossible.
Right. And DNEG, I feel like, does have a history of being sort of like the most invisible visual effects company. Like, you guys are ninjas.
Yeah, I mean, Double Negative grew as a company through their fantastic environment work. And that's where they really kind of we cut our teeth. I was there from around 2001 when they were only, I think I was employee number 35. And they've grown a little bit now. But they had such a breadth of experience in environment work and creating these seamless, invisible environments for features that weren't traditionally visual effects films. And so when you're watching a movie and you can see the environments have been created digitally, or you can see the blue screens, it rips you out of that experience. I want to be immersed in a film when I watch it. I want to focus on the story and the visuals, but not be trying to work out how they were created, or see a green screen, or see a blue screen, or see bad visual effects work. And Double Negative are really good at doing seamless, invisible environments. I have to say, so are ILM. Industrial Light and Magic are the pinnacle of visual effects, in my opinion.
Right. And now ILM is coming back to the franchise, so it's an interesting time.
It's a pretty neat little bit of hand-holding and sharing of that work. Double Negative picked up and worked on Rogue Nation and Fallout, and now ILM are working on Mission Impossible 7 and 8. So it's great.
So great.
Come back.
Well, you don't want anybody to be picking apart the visual effects, but obviously we are going to be doing that today. So,
oh no, hiding to nothing.
What were your big scenes?
So the biggest thing, the biggest challenge, I think, when we first came for visual effects was the Torus sequence. And that, if you want to go and try and shoot something in a difficult location, then underwater is difficult. Maybe space would be harder, but shooting underwater is incredibly challenging. And just from a choreography perspective, people underwater trying to hold their breath, trying to actually get a camera underwater, and actually sort of orchestrating the entire thing. So when you talk to Chris and he's saying it's a one-er, because that's how it was conceived. Yeah, the scene, I know it's cut into 3 separate shots in the movie as we see it today, but that was to heighten the tension. It's a multi-threaded story that involves Simon Pegg's character Benji and Tom trying to achieve an objective, and there's peril in that intercut, in that interplay. But the shot was designed to be a one-er. And Vincent Oberti, who was our previous supervisor at the 3rd floor, he worked for a long time with myself and Chris to design that one-er. I got an amazing reference, which I've used time and time again, of a YouTube video called The Spielberg One-er. And I don't know who the author is, but it's a legendary piece of footage to watch.
I think that might be Every Frame of Painting. Is that right? Maybe?
I think so, yeah.
He did great videos, yeah.
And it's so beautiful. And you watch it through and you just see all these one-ers that Spielberg and other directors have created that you didn't even realize were one-ers. And my favorite one in there is the scene with Marion in Raiders, where she's drinking. And it just describes this beautiful evolution of a shot, which goes from an establisher into a single of Marion, into a single of the person she's drinking alongside, into a 2-shot. You never realized it was a one-er. And Chris looked at me and he said, this is the whole point of a one-er, is that you are only letting the camera move because it's being directed, and the action that it's seeing is causing it to move from one place to another. You're not aware of the camera at all. You're just watching this picture unfold in front of you. And I think a lot of the problems with one-ers nowadays is that it's a showy thing. It's like, hey, we did this in one shot, and you're really aware of the camera. And the successful ones are where you're not aware of what the camera's doing. So that was a big, scary challenge for us, and it involved a huge amount of planning.
And so the elements that they were working from what I've seen pictures of, they were shooting in a tank. We talked to Pete Romano, who was the underwater photographer, and then in the background, there's a lot of, is it green screen you had in underwater? And that was to create like a lot of the work you're doing was creating the environments in the background. Is that kind of what it was about?
Yeah, exactly. So we shot at Leedston's stage and on their tank, and Pete was our DP, and the whole of the tank was green screen. And then we had a couple of different set pieces that we built that Tom needed to physically interact with. So there was the key lock, the key mechanism that he had to switch the key card into and out of, and there was the hatch mechanism that he gets to at the end of the sequence, and he's holding on to before he passes out. So those were really needed to be physical things that he had to touch and interact with and hold on to. But then inside of the tank itself, we had a couple of concentric ring tracks laid down on the floor, one of which would hold the camera if it needed to be on the floor. So we could motorize the camera and move it around on that track down at the ground. And another of which Tom could use if we needed to tether him to it or if we needed to puppeteer him around.
Wow.
And I think the big challenge was that the tank itself was smaller than the digital space the Torus would end up being. So we needed to photograph Tom in a way that allowed him to perform the entire, one of the takes was 2.5 minutes long. He needed to perform all these actions, but there were times when he had to travel physically further away from the camera than we could do in that space. So we had to manipulate him and his element, that render in post, to just move him further away or make it feel like he was traveling around, but photograph the correct perspective on him throughout that entire scene.
Wow. Well, I remember, I think Elswit was telling us too, was there some form of, I forget what it's called, transferred motion or something like that, how they used to do the old Star Wars spaceships?
Exactly.
They move the camera to make it look like Ethan's moving more than he is or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. Like, so long as you're photographing that person from the correct perspective, from the correct angle, you can move them in screen space further away from the camera or bring them closer to the camera. But so long as the perspective on that element is correct.
Right.
So, for example, you could just have somebody spinning on the spot, up, like turning tumbles on the spot. You could then take that element of them photographed and scale it down to make it appear that they were further away. And then in post-production, it looks like they're spinning and traveling closer to camera.
Right.
So there's some element of that. I got to say that Tom Cruise is a crazy person in all the right ways. He's so, I don't want to misinterpret crazy. He's just so focused and so 100% dedicated to what he's trying to do. And you understand it because he's doing so many crazy things, so many difficult things. He has to be focused and he has to be trained and he has to be dedicated. But to learn to hold your breath for close on, or even more than 6 minutes, that does sound impossible, doesn't it?
Yeah, insane.
And I know that Rebecca did the same. And we would come onto set and we'd be standing around on set having a chat. And then, 4 minutes later, Rebecca would surface and you'd be like, hang on, she's been underwater this whole time.
Oh, I didn't. So I don't know if we'd heard before that Rebecca Ferguson was able to do it as well. Wow, that's amazing.
They both trained for it. And I think it got fairly competitive in a healthy, competitive way. And you'd be like,
Of course,
I remember Wade saying to me, no, Rebecca held her breath for like 5 minutes yesterday. And it was like 10 seconds longer than Tom. And then so Tom would want to hold his breath for longer. But, hats off to Wade and his team for the level of prep and focus they have to go through to
right.
enable these people to achieve death-defying stunts in a safe way. That's pressure.
So what was the purpose of having the green screen background? Was it because the tank wasn't big enough to actually, like they couldn't build? Or is it too expensive to build the actual Torus to shoot in? Or what was the reasoning for that background to be green screen?
But a combination of both, really, because the tank itself wasn't big enough to create the entire of the Torus within it. But also imagine trying to physically shoot all of the action that takes place within it, actually getting the camera to move around that space.
Right.
Underwater would have been impossible. So we built enough of, and also incredibly expensive. So we built enough of the set that we knew we needed for physical interaction. And then we knew we could extend and replicate that set all the way around to create it. It was a fairly repetitive structure as well. Once you've created a little pie slice of that piece, it's something that you can digitally create and replicate all the way around. So that was a big part of the work that we had to do. There's also a lot of just going back to Tom and holding his breath, because I still can't really believe that he did it. It wasn't even a case of holding your breath for the 2.5 minutes you needed to do for the take, because imagine you've got to hold his breath, he's got to get underwater, you've got to wait 20 seconds for the bubbles to clear, because we needed to shoot with no bubbles or particulate in the water, because we needed to sell the idea that there was a current flowing. And if there were bubbles floating up perfectly from his face, vertically up to the surface of the water, it totally betrays the illusion that there's this current flowing.
Right.
So we had to wait for all that bubble and particulate to clear, roll the camera, Tom performs, gets the take, then you have to wait for the diver to get to Tom with the oxygen for him to take a breath. So I can see you shaking your head. It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Wow.
But a great fun piece to actually plan and prepare. We spent 10 days, I think, in the tank with a second unit team, just rehearsing with a stunt performer so that we could previs. Well, we previs the scene. We wanted to actually do what we call stunt viz and block the entire sequence with a stand-in so that we could show Chris and Tom and Eddie what the final scene could look like and give them an idea of what they needed to do.
When he jumps in, from up high and goes into the vortex-looking hole thing, how did you guys do that? What was that? What were those elements there?
That was a combination. So we shot at a disused power station down near Portsmouth called Fawley, Fawley. And they had this huge, big open space with those yellow gantries that you see spanning across that Ilsa and Tom stand on before they jump in. Then the plug hole or the sinkhole that's in the ground we referenced and we went and shot plates at a place called Lady Bower Reservoir, which is in Derbyshire. And they're actually overflow mechanisms that they have in reservoirs. So we went there with a drone and we shot plates of that from directly above. We knew that we were going to be 100 feet above it when we shot the stunts and the camera angles, so we could match that camera angle and get reference elements and plates of the waterfall flowing. So we've got a combination of practical plates in Fawley Power Station plus elements of the reservoir itself that we could drop in to create that sinkhole. Then when Tom jumps in, he actually did that stunt there on the day we had a green screen underneath him, which had a load of safety cardboard boxes, and he was on a wire. He did the jump, lands safely, and we then have to replace that green screen underneath him.
And he's like fully outstretched, like toes, right? Isn't he going feet first? Like, and he's going. So he was on a wire that then like sort of decelerated him before he hit the cardboard boxes or something? Because that would be a pretty hard hit, toes first into those cardboard boxes.
Yeah, I'd imagine there's a decelerator on that rig. There's going to be a safety decelerator on there, but he would have free fall for as long as he could do under his own momentum, and then toes touch the boxes and he starts decelerating,
right,
to make it safe. And again, this sort of thing I imagine Wade and his team, they've done that with stunt performers time and time again to make sure it's safe. And then I reckon Tom did it time and time and time again.
Yeah, of course.
So is there a digital double at all in that scene?
It's all photography of Tom.
Okay, how much of the scene was digitally augmented? Because I think recently, was it McQuarrie, Charles, who said like there's too much visual effects. We need to do another underwater thing, even crazier.
Yeah, I think so. There was a lot of, the entire environment was digital in the end. And then there's a lot of digital particulate in the water to get that sense of the current, as we've discussed. The robotic arms were digital, so we created those in 3D to spin and move around.
Yes.
And then I think the other thing is to be able to shoot that scene with our underwater camera, we chose to shoot it on a really wide angle lens. So we actually we were the first production to use the Alexa 65. And Pete Romano had to print and make an underwater housing for that camera before he'd even seen the camera.
Wow. So
he got the plans from Ari and 3D printed the housing to put the camera inside. And it turned up on the day. I don't think Robert had the camera for more than 2 days before he had to shoot with it. So anyway, back to the story. We had these we knew we were going to get massive digital plates, 6.5K wide. So we shot with a very wide angle lens, knowing that we could reframe and push in to crop in to still get 2K plates out of tighter lensed versions of the same master plate. but it meant that we didn't have to reload, we didn't have to change lens or swap lenses throughout the sequence, and we knew we could stitch that scene back together.
Is there some like sort of camera shake too that you guys did when he kind of comes around? Or okay.
Yeah, there's always little bits of that post manipulation that you do to cameras after the fact. So that'll happen in oftentimes even in non-visual effects shots.
Right.
You'll get digital manipulation like that. You know, I mean, it's a very gray scale, yeah, visual effects. At one end, you've got grading. That is a digital effect that you are putting onto a plate, or just a zoom, or a different sort of crop on the image, or a respeed, or reframing. That gets done a lot during post-production. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got fully digital shots that have nothing real in them at all.
Right.
Visual effects spans that whole spectrum.
Right.
And I think a lot of people don't quite realize that it's very gray, the area of work that we get involved in.
Yeah, I feel like, there are people who kind of look at CGI as the enemy or something, and it's like they're not realizing how much nowadays has been helped, and some of their favorite movies are using more CGI than they ever realized to augment, make the movies better.
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating when you get people who say, CGI is ruining movies. But what they don't realize is the thousands and thousands of shots in films that do have digital work, there are CG over here, there's green screens, they never noticed.
Yeah.
And they are not fixing movies, but they're certainly, enhancing and working with the sort of storytellers to make those movies better. Without them, they don't make sense.
Yeah.
Basically.
Right.
I think it was Ben Rosenblatt who, when we talked to him, he was saying something about I think maybe that's what you were referring to, Drew, but the visual effects of the Torus sequence. Like, I think it was like a very last minute, he was talking about some kind of last dash right before the movie came out to finish it because it wasn't quite ready yet or something, and they were just doing everything they could to get it. Were you a part of that process? I mean, you're the visual effects supervisor. I assume you were.
Yeah. I mean, often you're one of the first people on a movie as the visual effects suit, but you are always pretty much one of the last people off. But I remember that night, and I can't remember the exact date, but it was like 3 a.m. And like I say, it's one of the most complex shots and sequences in the film for us. So you don't plan to finish them at the beginning of your post-production schedule. You plan to finish them at the end, because they're going to get the most scrutiny and they're going to take the most amount of time. We probably worked on that scene for 20 plus weeks with multiple people. Oof. But yeah, it was probably like 2 days before we finished the film. And Tom and Chris came into the office at Double Negative. They came in at like 8 o'clock and they had a look at the work and they were like, oh, let's, change this, change that. We reviewed the shots and they went and had dinner and they came back at like 3 a.m. and looked at the shot again for the final time. But they didn't see the finished graded thing, I think, until the premiere a couple of days later. But it was to the wire.
I remember them saying that, yeah.
To the wire. But that's often the case in post is, great, it's a kind of corny comment, but great art is never finished yet. It's just abandoned. Right. And it's kind of the same with visual effects. They're passion projects that are worked on by really talented artists. And we always want to do more, but you always run out of time. So you do as much as you can with all of the available time you've got. And if someone gives you 2 more hours, you'll spend 2 more hours doing everything you can to make it better.
Well, we have a favorite visual effects shot. We think it's a visual effects shot in this movie. We need you. We're going to play a game called Was This a Visual Effects Shot? It's towards the end of the movie when there's the big sort of 3-way confrontation between Hunley and Alec Baldwin and Tom Holland.
I heard your podcast.
Hollander. And I feel like there is some invisible blue screen work there. Can you confirm or deny this?
This is after Ethan impersonates Attlee, yeah. Or the Prime Minister and Attlee.
There's a kind of downward-looking shot of the 3 of them.
We couldn't get them all in the same space at the same time.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Wow. We have eagle eyes, David.
You do.
You know what I mean?
But I know the shot. It's that incredibly low angle, very wide lens.
Yeah.
They're looming over him. But we couldn't get them back. It was a piece of additional photography, and That's often the case in films, is you need to continue to tell your story, and there are things that happen in the edit which mean you haven't necessarily got everything you wanted. So a piece of additional photography, and we couldn't get Alec Baldwin in at the same time. So we had a background plate from our set that we'd already shot, and we had two of the characters and on their own against green screen, and Alec Baldwin on green screen as well, but shot at separate times. And that's difficult because you've got to match the lighting exactly. You've got to match the black levels and the contrast and the lens angle and the film stock, and it's all got to match. And any tiny little thing that doesn't match about that, it starts to make your spidey sense tingle when you watch a film.
Well, did Elswit like sort of advise on that if you're shooting these separate elements?
Oh yeah,
Because
of course.
His photography is so distinctive, so
Yeah.
I imagine.
We were there and we all shot it together, and Robert shot it, but it's not a straightforward thing to do, to get all of those separate elements correct and absolutely perfect, because it's not through neglect that it doesn't look 100% perfect. You know, there's only so much time and there's only so much time and money that you have when you put projects together, and like I say, they're never finished.
Right.
I heard your podcast earlier on actually today when you were talking about that.
No, brother.
Oh, oops. Sorry about that.
We love it. We love everything. We even love the minor imperfections. We celebrate them all.
That's the texture of great movies, isn't it?
Yeah. We also heard that the shot, which I assumed was a CG shot of the kind of close-up of the notes on the sheet of paper in the opera sequence, was actually a motion control shot of
a
an
macro
actual
lens
piece of...
shot.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, that was a macro lens. That was in camera.
That's awesome.
Wow. So what did you guys do in the opera sequence?
So opera was a bit of a jigsaw for us actually, because they photographed out in the State Opera House in Vienna. So we had all the action in the front of house and the arrival and the exit as Ethan and Ilsa jump off the roof. And that was some of the first stuff we shot. My wife was 8 months pregnant at the time, so I was at home on almost baby watch. So I didn't go to Vienna, but we had another supervisor who went out there for us. So we photographed a load there. We also then shot in the UK at a stage called LH2 in West London. And we used that space because it's got these incredibly high ceilings. It's a music recording venue. So the ceilings are like 60 feet high. And we were able to build the stage and restage the entire opera there. And then we had all the gantry and truss that Ethan and the assassin fight on. They were physically there, and all of the backstage. Ilsa's tower that she gets into, her sniper position was built as well. So the whole of the fight was constructed and fought there, behind all of these layers of scrims that Robert and Jim Bissell had designed that sort of separate us from seeing the auditorium directly. And then we had a green screen out the back of the auditorium. So then the other pieces of that puzzle were, we had a second unit out in Vienna at the time, and we could only get on the stage in the evenings because there was a production going on during the day. So we had to shoot at night, and we got 50 extras dressed in opera costume, and we had 10 different camera positions around the auditorium and from the stage, and we moved those 50 people from one position to the next, to the next, to the next, like 10 different places all around the auditorium, and filmed them. So we had a massive jigsaw of all of these crowd elements that we had to stitch back together in order to create the crowds in the theatre. And it's, again, very invisible work. And I remember Robert called me a chicken in the middle of the shoot because he wanted to go with a black screen up behind instead of a blue screen or a green screen. And I said, but we're going to see that there's nobody out in the auditorium. And he said, David, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. I said, I need a green screen. I can't go with my gut here. I need a green screen so that I've got something to key to be able to put the crowd back there. And he went, you're such a chicken, Vickery. In the end, you know what? There was a bit of both, because there were definitely shots where you could tell there was nobody there, and we needed the green screen to be able to key and introduce the crowd into the background. But there were a lot of shots where it was so dark, you could have got away with just leaving it as a black screen and having absolutely no visual effects in there. So we were both right. Robert was such a legend because he actually used to work for ILM as well. Yeah, he worked and did all the motion control on some of the Star Wars speeder bike chases. And I sat in awe of him because of doing that.
And he was probably like, I shot There Will Be Blood too.
He was exactly like
that.
Can
be in awe of that, Vickery.
He was exactly like that.
Yeah.
He is hilarious.
And we're back. David Vickery, part 1 in the can. Charles, what did you think? Tell me what you thought.
Yeah, this is a really great conversation that we had with David. I just I love talking with him. He talked about the Spielberg Wonner video essay, which is from Every Frame of Painting, which was I think it was Tony was his first name. I think it was Zhu or Zhao. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but he made these amazing video essays years ago. We will include the link to this video essay that he mentioned in our show notes. And you should watch that if you haven't. It's really great. This video essay breaks down how Spielberg does wonders and how they're always sneaky and they don't call attention to themselves, but they're really impressive. So we will have that in our show notes on the website, LightTheFuse-podcast.com, in the episode guide. But I just there were so many great stories. I loved hearing the story about Robert Elswit calling him a chicken. I thought that was hilarious. We finally got details on that low angle shot of Alec Baldwin, Jeremy Renner, and Tom Cruise that was stitched together that we always suspected.
And also why ILM switched over, why DNEG took over for ILM, a story that we have not gotten in full until this week. So I thought that was really great.
Yeah, so I think it's great, and there's so much more next week that you got to come back for. He talks a lot more about Rogue Nation and about the mask gag that was done in camera, with the mirrored set. He talks about that and how that came about, and he talks about other movies he worked on too, like Children of Men, and it's the Christopher Nolan Batman movies and stuff. So there's a lot of great stuff next week you got to come back for. But was there anything else you wanted to say, or should I give my little shout outs as well?
No, give your shout outs.
Okay, I want to give a special thank you to Sonia Miranda. And thank you, Sonia, for making this episode possible. And also I want to credit our editor and mixer, Luke Burson, for the incredible job he always does. And, of course, Kevin Blumenfeld for our legally dissimilar music that he has provided for our show. And I guess I also want to tell everybody to sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/LightTheFuse. You can get weekly bonus episodes from us. We talk about everything from our top 5 Marvel movies to top 5 Pixar movies to our favorite movies of the year, or we break down directors or actors that we like and talk about their careers, or we talk about all the latest Mission Impossible news, of course, or Top Gun Maverick, of course, we're covering now as well for Light the Fuselage Plus, as we call it. Just like we call the bonus materials, we call it Light the Fuse Plus. So you should sign up for Light the Fuse Plus by signing up for our Patreon. Once again, patreon.com/LightTheFuse. Also, go to our TeePublic store, which is linked from our website, LightTheFusePodcast.com. In the merch section, you will see the link there and a few samples of what you can buy in terms of shirts or masks or magnets or pins or whatever you want to buy. If you do that, it helps support the show. And what else, Drew?
Well, you can follow us on social media at LightTheFusePod on Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, I just want to encourage everybody to like, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening, and give us a shout out in between episodes. Tell us what you want to hear, who you want us to talk to, and we do our best to accommodate. So I think that's about it, right, Charles? We'll be back next week with David Vickery, part 2.
That's I think that's it for us. Come back next week, please. And of course, we're getting closer and closer to the 200th. We're going to have a little bit more Light the Fuselage coming up as well. We got a really great Light the Fuselage episode that you're going to be excited about. So stay tuned, and we'll be back. Thanks again for listening, everyone. And before we go, another mission, should you choose to accept it, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember that you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at LightTheFusePod, and email us questions or comments at lightthefusepodcast@gmail.com. This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds.